Welcome to the Disability Sport Info Show, the podcast that explores academic knowledge about disability sport. My name is Dr. Chris Brown, and I'm an academic with an expertise in disability sport. Each episode, I focus on a specific topic of disability sport and speak to academic experts to understand the area in more depth. So, join me and listen to the Disability Sport Info Show to get an expert view on disability sport. Welcome to the Disability Sport Info Show. Thank you for joining me for another episode. In this episode, we'll be exploring disability sports coaching at the grassroots level. To help me understand this area, I spoke to Keon Richardson. So welcome, Keon. Thank you for joining me today for a discussion about grassroots disability sport coaching. So I'm delighted to welcome you, Keon, to the show. So we've got Keon Richardson. He has great expertise about coaching blind football and kind of general coaching experience and education. And so for today's discussion, we're going to learn a little bit more about what disability sport coaching is. So I think, Keon, just to kind of start our discussion, can you explain what do we mean by disability sport coaching? And also, how does it differ from non-disabled sport coaching? So I wonder if you could kind of just start our conversations with answering those questions, please.
Yeah, sure. So, yes, first of all, thank you for having me, Christopher. Most appreciate it. And yeah, disability sport in its entirety refers to a sport that's been modified from its original context, or it's been designed specifically for people with disabilities. So a sport like boccia is designed for people with disabilities, with physical disabilities. You've got goalball, who's designed for people with visual impairments. And the term disability sport is used interchangeably with other terms like adaptive sport, Paralympic sport, para sport. So disability sport coaching, simply put, is coaching children or young people, adults who have a disability. So it could be a pan-disability session where you have people with a range of disabilities and you're perhaps coaching one sport, so pan-disability football. It could be, as I mentioned, it could be goalball, where you're coaching a sport that's designed specifically for people with vision impairments. Or it could be adaptive sport, which is adapted from a mainstream sport, so like blind football, for example, which is adapted from futsal.
Okay, and from your experience, what is kind of the most common approach to grassroots disability sport? Is it the PAN session where we have multiple impairment groups, or is it more kind of specific to a particular impairment category or a particular sport? I mean, from your own experience, how have kind of mainstream organizations tried to approach disability sport?
So it varies from different countries and different settings within that country. So I think in England, for example, initially we went down the route of pan-disability, whereas I think because certain impairment groups want to play specific sports, I think it's more geared towards impairment-specific sports. So I think a lot of organizations are looking to introduce impairment-specific sports as opposed to pan-disability. I think pan-disability you often see more for people who have learning disabilities, because there's not really much adaptations that are needed for people who have learning disabilities. But if you're looking at impairment groups like people with cerebral palsy or people who have vision impairment, they're often looking to get into sports that have been adapted or modified specifically for their impairment.
Okay, so from a mainstream perspective, I mean, to me, I'm saying I'll coach myself, but it seems like it's probably easier to organize a pan disability session. You know, you don't have to have specific equipment, or you don't have to have specific coaching expertise to focus on a particular impairment group. So would that be fair to say that perhaps in the past, pan disability sessions have been focused on because there isn't huge amounts of adaptations that were required? Is that a fair comment to make?
Yeah, I definitely agree. And I think, again, the participants you often have in pan disability sessions, they often don't have a range of needs in compared to, let's say, a group of people with vision impaired who need audible equipment. The communication is going to be a lot different. It's going to be a lot of verbal cues than visual cues. So yeah, I think again, there's a lot less adaptation that are needed for pan disability.
Okay, and in terms of the specific impairment group kind of approach to coaching, that sounds quite tricky to try and organize and deliver, because you've got to kind of cater to the specific needs. You've got to understand what is required to be effective coaches. So what is the best approach trying to do those sessions? Because for the coaches who are listening, how would they go about delivering specific sessions for a particular impairment group?
Yeah, so I think it's understanding the group of individuals you have. And I know that sounds cliche to say, but I think when we're looking at specific impairment groups, what you'll often have is you'll have a wide range of experience. And one of the reasons why is because you often have players or participants who have acquired impairment. So they acquired their disability later on in life, whereas you have someone who's born with their impairment. So again, if we're looking at someone who has who's born, if we look at people who are visually impaired, if you had someone who was born totally blind, their understanding of sport or particular jargon that you use in sport could be completely different to someone who's played football at a particular level and then eventually lost their sight, maybe perhaps when they were 18. So it's understanding how the communication would vary between the two individuals I just mentioned, and again understanding what their sporting needs are. So the person who's born blind, they may not have the same experiences as a person who's played football at a high level in terms of exposure to different physical movements, and sort of their disposition towards sport. Because as I'm sure you're aware, a lot of people with disabilities are often discriminated from participating in sport, whether it's just been told that there's no opportunity for you, or access to the appropriate equipment, or the distance from where they live to where the session is. So these factors will have an influence on their attitudes towards sport and how their self-confidence. So it's understanding. I think a lot of it's understanding the person as an individual, their own experiences of sport, understanding their self-confidence, and how what their sporting needs are in terms of what does one player need to develop more of a peer relationships with other people who have a disability or don't have a disability, depending on what type of session it is, or do they need to improve their mobility, or do they need to improve their physical literacy skills, and that comes through again just having chats, having talks with the player or the participant, or as well again looking observations as well. So observing during your coaching practice, seeing how they adjust to the type of space they're playing in, and their technical ability is just making sure you're observant of particular things.
Okay, and in terms of how a coaching session is organized or how it is designed and developed, to what extent do coaches, from your experience, consider the lived experience of disability for that particular individual? So do coaches come in to sessions for disabled people and think, yeah, this is how I'm going to teach it, and they have to adapt to me? Or is it more, okay, this is what I think should be going on for this particular session, and then they adapt to the participants themselves? I mean, what, from your experience, how does it usually work?
Yeah, I think it's normally the latter. So I think for me, a lot of coaches involved in disability sport are often the polar opposite to grassroots sport. So typically in mainstream sport, the coach is kind of the boss. They're whatever they say or do, the final word, and you adjust to what they want or what they're going to do. Whereas I think disability sport, again, because you kind of have an understanding of the background that people with disabilities are coming from. It might be their first time participating in sport. Their parents are bringing them to kind of have respite, or to get them to create new friends. So I think a lot of it is being adjusting around their needs and what their motivation for coming to your session is.
In terms of the provision of coaching for disabled people, what's kind of the most popular, or what's the most common in terms of who it's targeted at? Is it going to be for younger people? Is it for adults? What about older adults? What kind of provision exists for those people from the different age ranges?
Yes, I think there's a lot of provision for young people. There's a lot of different funding ports that allow organizations to apply for funding be it your county football associations, or local charities or England organisations are wanting to focus on developing sport opportunities for people with disabilities. So there's a lot of what they can see that's been done in schools or community settings, and then I think a lot of charity or in adult sessions or adult clubs if they want to go down the competitive route in terms of competing in leagues. So yeah, I think for adults, I don't think there's as much in compared to children, but I think there definitely is quite a fair balance for children and adults.
Okay, and in terms of for a non-disabled coach, what's the education like for coaches when they are developing their craft and developing their experience and skills? When you were becoming, a more of a higher ranked coach or getting more experience, how did you find the education for including people from kind of different backgrounds, such as disability?
Yes, I think a lot of it is experiential learning, so learning through experience. When I think about, I'm 27 and I started my coaching journey when I was around 14, 15. And when I think about the different coach education courses I've done, my background's mainly in football and futsal, but I don't really think the FA used to have a coaching course for coaching disabled footballers, coaching blind footballers, coaching deaf footballers. But it was only a course for a day, and like there's only so much you can get out of a day's coaching course. So essentially, it was learning from. And I've been to different coaching in different settings. So I've coached Party Side and Deaf Futsal Regional Talent Centre. I've done learning disability football sessions. I've done pan disability football sessions. I've done mental health football sessions. And a lot of it you learn through experience, as I said. So you learn through other coaches that are perhaps leading the session. You learn from the different participants you have in front of you and how you adapt according to their needs, be it their impairment or their motivational needs to participate in the session. So yeah, and then I think the academic side kind of helped a lot in terms of understanding theoretical approaches and pedagogical approaches to coaching. So one of the very useful theories that I've come across was the STEP model developed by Black and Stevenson. So the STEP is basically activity framework based on the inclusion spectrum framework. So it is looking at maximizing participation for people of all abilities, ages, and different genders. So STEP is the acronym. So the S stands for space. So it's increasing or decreasing the space according to the mobility of your participation of your participants. So you're looking at the interaction and movement within that area. And then you can have things like a safe zone or ability-based zone. So if you're doing a tag game, for example, if you know you have someone who has cerebral palsy, so they may have limited movement, you may create a safe zone within that box to say, right, if you need a breathe or time out, you'll find it difficult, you can stay in that safe zone for 5 seconds, 3 seconds. So it's sort of modifying the space according to the player's need and what type of interaction you want to have. And then the task is obviously looking at what objective you're trying to achieve from the session and how you adjust the task to fit with your objectives. So if I'm looking shooting with both feet, I may say the task is if you're right-footed and you score with your left foot, the goal's worth 3 points. And then if you're looking at equipment, so the E in STEP stand for equipment. So looking at adjusting the equipment to bring out different returns. So if we're looking at dribbling, for example, and having close control, you may want to use smaller balls. Or again, if you have someone who has a visual impairment and struggles to see the ball, you can use an audible ball or a brighter coloured ball. And again, thinking about equipment, looking at cones as well. So in previous sessions, when I've done pan disability sessions, I remember I had a session where I predominantly had adults who had learning disabilities. So I'd normally use like cones, like saucer cones. I literally remember he doesn't often come to the session, but there was a participant who had a wheelchair. There was a wheelchair user. and literally you'll just crush all the salsa cones. So if I'm just thinking, again, if I'm just thinking from this is my session, I can just say you're the issue because your wheelchair's crushing my cones. Whereas actually you can use flat markers, and I like to use flat markers because again, you don't have the issue of people crushing on them or people have sensory needs or limited spatial awareness. Instead of stepping on your cones, you can use a flat marker, so it prevents that issue from happening. And then the P is for people. So it's looking at how people interact within that session. So looking at small-sided games. So again, if I've got a group of people who have cerebral palsy, instead of the game being 11 aside, so having 22 people on the field, I may do the game of cerebral palsy actually is 7 aside, but I could actually say, I can make it 3 against 3, so that there's more movement. There's not many affordances for the kids, the people with cerebral palsy to make so many complex decisions. You can break it down to 3v3 to focus on a particular task. So it could be shooting, could be defending. And I kind of added another letter. So I call it steps instead of step. So the last one is the score, which I mentioned. So manipulating the score. So if you're looking at football, typically through football, you score, the point is scored by shooting the ball in the goal. So again, looking at the score, depending on what my task is or the objective for the session, how can I adjust the score to help motivate the participants? So like I mentioned as an example, if I'm looking at shooting with both feet, I could say if you shoot with your less preferred foot, it could be 3 points. Or if I'm looking at counter-attacking, I could say if you tackle the ball from an opponent and score within 10 seconds, the goal's worth 5 points. So it's again looking at manipulating the score in alignment with what the objective of my session is.
Interesting. All right. Well, thank you for that. I mean, so that's a step model, or for you, Keon, the adapted version is steps. So that's I'm not sure if it's a trademark or copyright, but that's what Keon uses, is the steps model. They're really interesting. So thank you for that. And on the description for the podcast episode, I'll include a link to the step model so that people can have a look at it if they are interested. Okay, so you obviously have a passion and interest in disability sport, clearly based on your experience and your background. For those coaches who maybe don't have any involvement or any particular interest in disability sport, what should they do, or what should they consider if for their mainstream session there is an individual with an impairment who wants to participate? How would that coach go about adapting, or what should they be aware of when delivering the session for people with impairments who are also wanting to participate in their coaching session? What should a non-disabled coach who hasn't particularly had much involvement or experience with disability go about delivering that session?
Yes, I think essentially, I think with disability, I think it's kind of been a taboo thing. So I think for many, especially in the realms of coaching, for people who don't have experience coaching disability sport or people with a disability, they're often scared to touch around the subject. So I think it's just having a conversation with their parent or the player about, okay, what do you have? First of all, do you have any medical needs I need to be aware about in relation to your disability or your impairment? What are you comfortable doing? What aren't you comfortable doing? And what is the best way to effectively communicate with you? So when I was working at Barclays Sight and Deaf Futsal Regional Talent Centre, I helped a few of the players after their post-exit from the program get into mainstream futsal clubs. So again, a lot of the coaches didn't have experience communicating with a player who has a hearing impairment. But I think it's just understanding like how some of the verbal cues, or even just understanding bits of sign language from themselves. So again, a person who has a hearing impairment, if you're going to communicate, don't put your hand over your mouth or don't have your back turned towards them when you're communicating. So I think it's like I said, but that comes from, for one, it comes from experience, but two, more importantly, it comes from having a communication with that person. Because again, some people use a hearing aid, so they can pick up on sometimes even if your back is turned, they can pick up on what you are saying. Whereas some people some people don't, or they rather lip read. So again, it's understanding the individual. And yeah, again, that will help inform your practice, because you can just assume, oh, this person is therefore they have cerebral palsy, therefore they can't do this, they can't do that. But it's like I said, all these factors which are beneath the surface about if they were born with impairment or if they acquired it on later life is going to affect their sporting needs and their understanding of sport and how they communicate and how they live the experiences. So I think as you mentioned, as you asked at the start, is understanding their lived experiences, and then we can set up a plan. I can't give a prescription of what you should do, because I think it's essentially understanding the person first. So again, you may have a person in your session who's got a visual impairment. They may be partially sighted, so they may have tunnel vision. So again, it's thinking about how you set up your practice, what type of do you use pitch markings. So again, if it's a session where you have everyone who's sighted, you may be able to get away with not using cones, because you may say, oh, we're playing up to the white lines, whereas some people may have color blindness or a vision impairment that makes it difficult for them to see certain colors or certain pitch markings. So again, it's understanding the individual as well.
Yeah, really interesting. I mean, it sounds like to me, as a non-expert, obviously you are the expert in terms of coaching, that you just adjust it around your participants like you would in any other situation. Yeah, so excellent coaching should be, what's your participants like? What do they need? How should you structure it based on their requirements, etc., rather than having that predefined idea of what exactly you're going to deliver. It's about being flexible, adaptable, etc.
Yeah.
I think also what you said about some people kind of skirting around the issue of disability because maybe they don't want to offend someone, or they're a bit not sure about what they're allowed to say, etc. I think that kind of taps into there was a campaign by Scope, the charity, a few years ago called End the Awkward. I don't know if you saw it. Had Warwick Davis in it, for example, where some people don't engage disability because they are worried about offending, when actually we just got to treat them like individuals. They are people at the end of the day. And so how do people get over that? If they are just afraid they might offend someone or they might not do it right, as you say, most of what your experience or your abilities as a coach is based on your experiences. But how do people actually have confidence enough to be able to engage and learn that experience in the first place? What would your key recommendation be for coaches who maybe are a little bit afraid about getting involved in this space?
Yeah, I think what's important is to try and find a mutual ground. I've worked in disability sport in different contexts in different countries. Since 2018, I've been working on introducing blind football in Zimbabwe, or formalize it through a project. And what I found was that many people were quite although they want to participate in football, they've been told for a large part of their life that they can't because they're blind or they're vision impaired. So although they're interested in sport, it's not something you can kind of form the relationship on as the first point. So it's kind of finding like a mutual ground in something. So for me, I was always interested in the Shona language, which is one of the native languages in Zimbabwe. So again, I think what we have to realize as well as able-bodied coaches, that there kind of is a power dynamic between, again, you see it in the coach-athlete relationship, but being a non-disabled coach versus with a disabled athlete, there is a sort of power dynamic that exists. So it's kind of just breaking that and just saying, look, like, and for me, my personal principle is that, although yes, we do have hierarchy, we do need to have respect. Like, it is a collaboration, because without any coaching is worthless if you don't have any players. And, players need coaches to be able to improve and enhance their performance. So it's understanding there's a mutual relationship. And, it doesn't always have to be our relationship solely based on football. They could be really interested in a certain genre of music, or you could be interested in art. And again, that just comes from just having a conversation with that person and just not being afraid. Because even, again, like I said, it's understand the individual, because some people are happy some people with disabilities are happy to, like we have jargon, like, if I'm working with a blind person, for example, and I say, do you see what I mean? Or did you see that? It's like, well, of course I didn't see it. For some people, they may generally take offense to it, whereas others are again, some people may be born without being blind, so they understand that jargon. When you're around people with disabilities more often, like, you just become more comfortable about not being offensive, because you understand the person's you understand their personality, you understand like how far you can go with certain jokes and stuff like that. So I think it's just immersing yourself within settings where people with disabilities, and it becomes less of a thing of, I don't want to offend you. Then it becomes less about offending than more about developing a personal relationship. I think the challenge with disability sport coaching is that, again, because in comparison to grassroots sport, the number of people with disability who participate in sport compared to people without disability sport is quite sporadic. It's a lot lower for people with disability. So I think the demand, although the demand is there, it's not as significant as grassroots sport. So there's not many. Like, if I look at my FA level 1, for example, in coaching football, if I'm not mistaken, it was over 10 days. Whereas a lot of disability sport coaching courses are like introductory courses. It's for like a day. It's a day-long workshop. I know Global have a introductory global coaching course, which was for 1 day. And again, it was although it was for 1 day, it was quite impactful. But I think it would be more helpful if there was a longer course, and if it had like more similar to like what the FA do. We have in situ visits where tutors come out and see you in practice and give you advice and recommendations. I think that's kind of happening in different sports. I know with the Football Association, they have coach mentors for disability football, which is something I feel that's quite important. But it'd be nice to see that across a range of different sports as well.
What are the main challenges then facing coaches in disability sport? I mean, you probably mentioned quite a few already, but are there any additional challenges or real kind of prominent challenges that you want to highlight that coaches might face when they are trying to include people from a wide background such as disability?
Yeah, so I think a few of the challenges are mainly around locality, in terms of where your session is in relation to where people with disabilities live. And again, transportation might be issues if they got a mobility, if they have a mobility impairment or a physical impairment. It may be a cost for parents to send them to your session, so they may not attend as regularly. And again, looking at the cost of venue hire in relation and in correlation with access to funding, sometimes it might not be possible to have a regular weekly session. It might be a session that runs for 2 months or once a month. But again, sometimes it's hard to see, although you're having an impact, it's hard to see. You'll see a lot more fluctuation in development, because again, if you're doing a session for once a month, for that one session, you might see they're improving quite a lot, whereas the next month you might see a bit of regression because it's been so long since they last participated in your formal session. But I think to counteract that, I think for me, it comes back to your practice design. So for me, I always like to deliver activities and games that, if they had the right equipment, they could do that by themselves or with their friends or with their parents or family members in their own, away from the session. And I think another issue is around equipment. So again, if you're looking at specific impairment groups, especially for people with vision impairments, you're going to need adapted equipment. Also, even for like people who are wheelchair users, we're looking at power chair football. We also need a specific type of chair to play the sport, and then you also need the ball's a lot bigger compared to like a regular 11-side football. And again, it's not cheap, so a lot of adaptive equipment is quite expensive. So even from blind football, for example, like an average ball costs around £30 So
Wow.
again, if you got a session of 10 kids, you want to buy 10 balls, 5 balls, that's more than £150. So it can be quite expensive to get access to adapted equipment, especially if you haven't got funding to do so. And I think another challenge is, again, if you're one of the coaches who kind of does the prescription coaching, it's kind of difficult to get that engagement because, again, you don't really have a real understanding of what the your participants want from the session, what their experiences and needs, what experiences they have and what their needs are. So you may not get that active engagement that you'd like to see.
Okay, some really interesting challenges that you've highlighted there. Final question, I think. Let's end it on positive. What does excellent coaching look like for disability sport, in your opinion?
Yeah, so for me, excellent grassroots coaching, this really looks like participants who are fully engaged. They're getting a large number of benefits from the session, not just, so you can look at the technical aspect and physical aspect, but I think also the psychological aspect and social aspect for me is quite important. So they're developing almost like a family-like network with the participants. They feel they're not only friends, but they feel like they're lifelong friends that they developed. And from the psychological aspect, their self-esteem is improving, their confidence and their desire to participate in sport. I think that's one of the key things. I think is what looks like excellent coaching. So seeing someone who may not like sport or who has big hesitations about participating in sport, to saying to their mom that they can't wait for the next session, or they're frustrated that they turned up 5 minutes late. I think that's what excellent grassroots coaching looks like to me. That means that you're delivering a high quality experience that they want to be part of and they don't want to miss out on.
Thank you so much, Keon. It's been great chatting to you, and I look forward to catching up with you soon.
Yeah, thank you very much, Chris. Really, really enjoyed it, and thank you for having me.
No worries. Thank you. That's it. That's all we have time for. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Disability Sport Info Show. Stay tuned for another episode. Until then, goodbye. You've been listening to the Disability Sport Info Show, academic insights into disability sport.